If you look at every Final Four going back to 1985, one of these Magnificent Seven has been in the Final Four, at least one of them. There's only been 3 years since 1985 where one of these seven has not gone to the Final Four. So to your point, this is very much something of a history book, in that it is foundational to the sport, what these teams are about, how they came to this level of success and sustained dominance in some ways, right? It's the Adolph Rupp and the Bobby Knight story and the Coach Smith and the Coach K. And I do think that in this moment, it's like, well, where do these seven go from here? How is the next decade or two going to look for these seven? And anybody who tells you that they have the answer is full of it. Like, we don't know at this point, but they have slipped a little bit, right? Indiana has really been borderline irrelevant for 20 years with a couple of outlier seasons, if you will. Kansas wasn't particularly good this year. The Hoosiers missed the tournament. UCLA has one title post Wooden.
Let's jump into this book, and we found it really fascinating. So what was kind of the driving force in putting this book together, just a creative process, and just kind of your thoughts on the finished product?
Yeah. As I said, I've been a basketball fan since I was a kid. In some form or capacity, something like that. I've wanted to write a book for a long time. Hopefully I write better than I speak. And my co-author, Mark Mailer, full disclosure, he's a family friend. He's known me since I was like 8 weeks old. He grew up with my mom's college roommate, and I've been up to New York City to watch the Big East tournament, and he came with me, and I go to a lot of Carolina games. I work for the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he came down to go to a UNC UVA game a couple years ago. And he sends me an email 2 years ago, and he's like, hey, I'm writing my next book. I'm in the process of doing this. I'm looking for a recommendation. Do you have any recommendations on somebody who can handle, helping me with the book and really handling the UNC, the Duke, and the Kentucky chapters? And I was like, and mind you, he's known me since I was in diapers, right? And I was like, Mark, I can recommend several people, but can we at least have a conversation first? I have little kids. I have a 6 and a 3-year-old. And he said, yeah, of course we can have a conversation, but I didn't think you'd have time for this. And I said, I don't know if I have any time for it, but like, this is the possibility of a childhood dream coming to fruition. So let's see if we can do it. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And it was a lot of fun, right? Like, it's a lot of fun trying to get people on the horn who played at Duke before Coach K, right? Like, I spent some time with Jeff Mullins, who was this really great Duke basketball player in the early 1960s. He went on, he had a strong NBA career. He won a title with the Golden State Warriors in 75. So like, getting people like him on the phone, getting people on the phone who played pickup with Michael Jordan and Lawrence Taylor, and were with Dean before Coach Smith had won a title. And the big question, and this is hard for probably people of our age to believe, but there was a question for a long time: can Dean Smith win the big one? That was the knock on him for a long time. So the process was a lot of fun, and to be at the finish line, to hold a book that I had hopefully an equal part in, was pretty rewarding. Yeah.
So can you explain, because, when I was growing up, college basketball, just the importance of just the elite teams, the Blue Bloods were fairly important. And I might be speaking out of turn, but I feel now just those teams, just because of just the way the sports landscape is not as important to kind of to your casual fan compared to when I was growing up. Like, even though my mind was focused on my local team, I still was aware of just the elite of college basketball, even though I wasn't watching every game every week. But I feel like times have changed. So I'm just wondering, can you explain the importance of these blue blood teams to the infrastructure of college basketball?
So 100% I agree with you that it has changed. This is a very fluid, soft landscape, however you want to kind of coin it. These are foundational, these 7 schools, right? And I think, and I'm happy to go kind of next level, or try to at least. But one way that I've synthesized my head around it is we have had 85 NCAA tournaments. So the first one was in 1939. Oregon wins it all, clips the Nets, fine. Of those 85, and if you know this, I'll be very impressed. Most people don't know this. Of the 85, how many national championships have these magnificent 7, Duke, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, UCLA, North Carolina, and UConn? How many have they collectively won of the 85 NCAA tournaments?
Bad was so crazy. Bad with sports trivia.
And I'm throwing you a curveball. I guess not nice. Yeah.
I would say, my guess, probably like 60.
60. Not quite that many.
Yeah.
45. right? But 45 or 60, I mean, this is an overwhelming amount.
Yeah, it's
Um,
incredible.
if you look at every Final Four going back to 1985, one of these Magnificent Seven has been in the Final Four, at least one of them. There's only been 3 years since 1985 where one of these seven has not gone to the Final Four. So, to your point, this is very much something of a history book in that it is foundational to the sport, what these teams are about, how they came to this level of success and sustained dominance in some ways, right? It's the Adolph Rupp and the Bobby Knight story and the Coach Smith and the Coach K. And I do think that in this moment, it's like, well, where do these seven go from here? How is the next decade or two going to look for these seven? And anybody who tells you that they have the answer is full of it. Like, we don't know at this point, but they have slipped a little bit, right? Indiana has really been borderline irrelevant for 20 years with a couple of outlier seasons, if you will. Kansas wasn't particularly good this year. The Hoosiers missed the tournament. UCLA has one title post Wooden. So some of this is, I think, very much an open question of, are these historic blue bloods going to have the same level of prominence in the sport moving forward? And my hunch is not all of them, and not all of them on the same level.
What has kind of been the pain points for these teams struggling? UCLA kind of pops into my mind just because Steve Alford, coach at New Mexico, he left New Mexico to go to UCLA. It was a huge deal. Lobo fans were outraged, but I understand why he did it. I mean, it made sense to me. But I don't think he achieved the success that he was thinking of, and now he's at Nevada. So just wondering, not only with UCLA, but you mentioned Indiana as well, what have kind of been the pain points throughout the years that have kind of prevented him from achieving that former glory, you think?
I think UCLA has gotten in its way oftentimes in the post-Wooden era, right? Following the legend is the most impossible thing to do in sports in many regards. And they've run off many a coach. They've run off many a successful coach. I mean, we can parse out, the Ben Howland years and the fact that it wasn't great there at the end. But I think it's something of a self-fulfilling prophecy with some of these schools where you have so much success and the expectations get a little bit out of whack. That's UCLA. UCLA also, I think, to be fair, is an outlier in some ways from the other seven in that it's in a major city. They have to compete with the Lakers to a degree and USC to a degree, and they've long had major football at UCLA. UCLA is just odd, right? Because they're not. I think throughout your life and my life, they haven't been this dominant program. So I don't know if that gets to the answer to your question or not, but I think they have run off many of coaches. They've had loads of talent. Like, if you think of all the NBA guys that have come through the UCLA system, even in the past 25 or 30 years, I think maybe to round it out, what I do think is interesting about UCLA is you think about, all right, they went to the Final Four a couple times in the 2000s. They just went, what was it, 2-3 years ago? And you think, what if they had another one? Would that change the perception at all? And that's one of those, those funky what ifs that we can play a lot of different ways. But that's UCLA. And Indiana, poor Indiana, right? Like, I think in many respects they just it's crazy to say because it's a generation ago now, but they haven't really come back to the limelight, to the top tier of college basketball since Bobby Knight left. The lone exception being the title game in 2002. Who was IU's coach then? It was Mike Davis. It was one of Bobby Knight's guys. So I don't think they have really reinvented or redefined themselves or planted that white and red flag back in the ground post Knight.
So let's contrast that with UConn, who has had a lot of success most recently. What has been the key? Usually, I would say, during my lifetime at least, the women's team have had, I think, the majority of success, but the men have really made a rise in terms of kind of putting their flag down recently for the blue blood. So what has been their key for their success, you think?
Justin, I really wish there's a joke somewhere in here. I went to Syracuse, and I'd love to say it's because of Syracuse, because we gave them such competition. I envy UConn as a Syracuse fan, right? Because I've been a fan of Syracuse for going on 30 years. Syracuse is a very good program, but if Syracuse and UConn were like this, I mean, UConn, there's no argument. UConn is the best program in the last 25 years. They have 6 national titles. They've done in 25 years what North Carolina has done across the last 60 years. But how have they done it, right? I think that it was similar to this. It was built on Calhoun, right? Like Calhoun had long been a successful college basketball coach, and they built it on Calhoun with those early titles in '99, the upset of Duke, and they ran it back in '04. And it's, to me, remarkable and worth the reminder. Like, they've won those 6 with 3 different coaches: Hurley, Calhoun, and Kevin Ollie. And I think that they have just had wonderful success recruiting. They've had a number of very good NBA players, like just a wonderful pipeline that it was a very good pipeline in the 80s and 90s, but it took off with Ray Allen. And then you get into those early 2000s teams with Emeka Okafor and Karan Butler, so on and so forth. And to me, it's coaching, in a word. It's coaching, but it's also, they're close enough to New York City. They're a big enough state school that, back in the day, you go into Madison Square Garden to the Big East tournament, and the Johnny's fans and the Q's fans, and I mean, UConn fans, they didn't run the place. UConn fans run that place now. And they are, and it pains me to say it, Justin, but they are magnificent this last quarter century.
One more question on the Blue Bloods, and I love your thoughts on just NIL and the transfer rules. I just find that fascinating. Who do you think will be the 8th Blue Blood team, you think? Is there an opening for that kind of 8th slot? Just in terms of who's been rising, or not?
I'm open to everything. I'm certainly open to the conversation. So to me, some schools come to mind. You tell me if any of them really pop for you. Villanova has 3 national titles, right? They have 2 in the last handful of years. Then they, of course, have the '85 upset against Georgetown. You got Louisville with 3 national titles, 2 with Denny Crum, '80 and '86. And then you've got the Patino. It's vacated, but you can't vacate a thing that actually happened, right? So you've got Louisville, you've got Villanova. Michigan State has the game back in '79, the Magic Bird game. They have Izzo's early title in 2000, and they've been a Final Four stalwart, right? These last 2 decades. Florida ran it back, right? They went back to back with Donovan, and Al Horford and Corey Brewer, that stacked team. What if Florida wins this year? Like, does Florida, like, hey, make some room for us? I think that's a sound argument. And then if you want to go back a little bit further, I think Cincinnati had some elite success very long time ago. And there's also NC State. Like, where I sit, it's Carolina or Duke, Blue Devils or Tar Heels, right? But people forget that NC State has claimed 2 national titles, and they also had another undefeated season in the 1970s, but they were banned from the postseason for illegal recruitment of David Thompson. So they didn't have the opportunity to claim a banner that year. So those are a few of the ones that pop for me. Do any of them speak to you?
That's a good question. I think I agree with you with Villanova and Louisville. I think those are the 2 teams that come to mind. It's an excellent point about Florida as well. I think those teams were very prominent, especially with Donovan. So I think those are kind of the 3 in mind. But I think that kind of goes to my next question, which is a lot of parity, and just with now with NIL and transfer rules, specifically to the Blue Bloods, what is kind of your thoughts on kind of the new paradigm shift we've seen within college basketball to the Blue Blood schools in particular?
Listen, I mean, money has long been an important part of the game, and recruiting and finding success, even if it was a dirty secret and people didn't want to talk about it. That's just the reality of what has been. But now it's out in the open, and it's front and center. And I think it's a little bit of a foolish position to say, yeah, the SEC has 14 teams in the NCAA tournament this year. Money doesn't have anything to do with that. Football doesn't have anything to do with that. Of course it does. How much? I don't, like, that's way above my level of knowledge. But money drives this thing. And, one of the questions that I was getting throughout the winter from friends and family — my wife went to Carolina and half of her family went to Carolina. One of the questions I kept getting was, what's going on with Hubert Davis? Is Hubert Davis in trouble? Is he going to get fired? Is this it if they don't make the tournament? And I said, I don't know. Let's see. Well, then we learned about an extension. Actually, it happened last summer, but we learned about it over the winter. So Hubert Davis got an extension. He's here through 2030. And that's noteworthy. Fine. Okay. Carolina's going to stick with their guy. But also noteworthy is when they announced the extension for Hubert Davis, they announced a GM, a general manager for the basketball program. And truly, I'm embarrassed to say this a little bit. I was like, they don't have a general manager? But what do you mean they don't have a general manager? For context, the Carolina women's team has had a manager for 3 years. So you ask about NIL, and I think this is, and some people I'm sure are listening right now, they're like, what is he talking about? A general manager? Like, we're talking about college basketball. But in the NIL space, as we think about corporate sponsorships, as we think about recruiting pipelines and ways to celebrate and grow the brand of the program, a general manager has become a necessary operator. Duke was, if not the first, one of the very first schools to go out and create hire for this newly created position. So I think the 7 Blue Bloods need that. I think they need, if we're being blunt about it, they need a lot of money. They need to continue generating revenue. And briefly on the NIL thing, I don't know if we'll necessarily get into it. I'm generally a proponent of, having players, granting players the opportunity to make money. So while I think that is a good development, look at coaches who've been making 8 figures for a really long time, 7 figures for a really long time. Clearly there is an issue here with the portal. It's not my job to solve it. I do two things I've wondered about. Number one, can they put a limit on the number of transfers a player can have in his or her career? That to me seems like a logical one. And number two, if we're dealing with contracts, if we're dealing with highly recruited point guard out of Dallas, Texas, and he wants to go, I'm just making this up on the fly here, right? He wants to play at Kentucky. If it's a contract, can't there be a multi-year pact here? Why does everything have to be on kind of a 1-year expiring thing? Wouldn't like a 2 or a 3-year deal, wouldn't that give the team security, the player security? I think selfishly from a fan standpoint, you start to look at it, you go, all right, I don't have to learn a new roster every year. Like I'm gonna feel a little bit more in sync with this team. So those are some things I wonder about for the future.
Yeah, I agree with you just because I think I am for players making money, but it does lose that connection with the teams when not only the team that you follow, but the entire conference is switching. And what's been worse in my neck of the woods is conference realignment. So
Yes.
you have a lot of rivalries that have been huge parts of like my life. They're gone now. And honestly, I have to give Mountain West props now. How they performed in the tournament's another thing, but at least in terms of getting a number of schools making the tournament, they have done a phenomenal job in terms of maintaining that conference, despite teams leaving. And
Absolutely.
so for myself as a fan, it's just like not only is me being invested in the University of New Mexico, but also there's the other teams within the conference. But like those teams, they leave, and so those rivalries are gone. So it's just a double whammy. So it makes it really hard to be invested in college basketball overall. And despite I enjoy it. So
I'll just say this briefly. I don't think I have anything over my shoulders. It's a different part of the house where I have all my Syracuse garb. Syracuse not playing Georgetown twice a year or once a year. Like come on. Like this is college basketball. We need the Hoyas and the Orange Men every winter. And ideally we get it twice every winter. I mean, they have a series now and they do play, but it's not big. The conference realignment stuff it's the epitome of greed. And I think to your point, Justin, what hurts is that they're deconstructing some of these cultural mainstays, and it's not for the best of the sport.
No, I completely agree. It's really hurt my enjoyment of just being fully invested. And also it kind of hurts the NBA as well, just in terms of, I mean, that really helped the WNBA with Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Juju Watkins, like having that investment in college and seeing them go to the pros. And I think that's been reciprocal within the NBA. So as is truly unfortunate. Do you think just in terms of what happens now, I've talked to other journalists and analysts, and they have been really opposed to just the transfer rules in football, in terms of they're saying it's to destroy college football. Do you think that in terms of these changes, do you think it's had the same effect on college basketball, or do you see it's different, just depending on the sport in terms of how these transfer rules and NIL works?
I don't think I would use the word destroy in college basketball. That feels a little strong. I'm not gonna sing its praises though, right? And for me, and listen, I was a lousy high school basketball player. So far be it from me to judge really a high level talented basketball player. But I do think there's something to be said for, yeah, it gets hard. Like what's the Patino quote? Like, this is what life is about. This is the adversity. Like, this is what you got to work through. And fine, the transfer portal's there and everybody should have access to it. But maybe once. And if there are extenuating circumstances, maybe twice. But like to have the transfer portal, you don't like the deal you got. You're not pleased with the playing time. You're going to go off to somewhere else. And it's like, does this really serve the young man or the young woman who's trying to become a better player? And ho hum, maybe by the way, also working on a degree. Like it just seems kind of foolish to have this. It's the opposite of a boogeyman. It's this pie in the sky. Oh, the transfer portal. It's going to solve everything. And I think it's a good addition to the landscape, but it needs to be reined in. If I'm making sense there.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I want to transition back to the Blue Bloods real quick. And my colleague, he had a question that he wanted me to ask. And that is was legendary coaches. You mentioned Bob Knight and then Coach K, just in terms of how much of an impact they have on these programs, and then they leave. And I think with Duke, they have recovered very nicely. But with some other schools, it's just kind of I'm wondering, do you think that shadow is such a hard thing to overcome for that program to, evolve from what the foundation has been laid? It's just interesting that dichotomy where I think Duke has done a really good job of that, whereas other schools have struggled. That's what I want to get your thoughts in terms of transitioning kind of off that this really
Sure.
grind era of success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of it is a case by case thing, right? Where Duke, I mean, from my perspective, and I think most any logical person's perspective, the K to Shire handoff bridge has gone very well. And I think that's a testament to what Krzyzewski built and who Shire is as a coach. And I think it also is somewhat attributable to the culture and the program they have built there. Like the bones are strong, the stilts are strong, they are incredibly well funded and well resourced. And that's not to take anything away from John Shire, but it's not just about the head coach, right? And I think the jury's still out on Mark Pope in Kentucky, right? Like we're going to see they ran off John Calipari, and I'm not going to adjudicate that. I talked to a lot of former players that they didn't like Calipari, they didn't like his style, his temperament, they didn't think he was best for Big Blue, and okay, that's fine. And if the proof in the pudding is the NCAA tournament success, he clearly didn't have a lot of that. After really 2012 and then 2015, the undefeated season that was upended. But at the same time, Calipari produced more or almost as many NBA first-round draft picks in his time at Kentucky as Coach K did in 4 decades at Duke, right? So what are the goals of the coach, and how is the coach being supported? So I think that is really that's part of it. I mentioned UNC and not having a GM earlier, right? So like Hubert Davis is a Carolina guy. Carolina is huge on the family element. They wanted somebody who was from the Coach Smith pipeline. They have that in Hubert Davis. So now they really have to round that out and support him in different ways. So the answer to your question is, I guess I admit I'm not answering it. It's an incredibly delicate and complicated equation, I think. And as I look at the schools, I mean, UCLA and Indiana, and they in some ways have not recovered from great coaches. And I do think about UConn, and I just think and we can play it back here, right? What if Hurley had taken the Lakers job? What if he had bolted? Who is UConn going to get? And do they have enough of a culture and apparatus to seamlessly or close to seamlessly bring somebody in and maintain that elite performance? And that's where the equation gets pretty daunting, I think, at times.
With the tournament going on fairly soon, they have expanded the field recently, and there's been rumors of expanding the field even more. Just wanted to get your thoughts on, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing for just March Madness overall, including more schools?
I want the field to be 64.
Yeah.
And I don't know who I'm going to tick off with that. It's too big at 68, right? Like, let's think, who are the last 4 in? Carolina was obviously one of the last 4 in. You got Texas, you got Xavier's one of the other. I mean, if we want to take the final, the 4, it's San Diego State, Carolina, and I think Xavier and Texas. I'm not looking at it, but that's where my brain goes. With respect to my wife's family, and I'm a Carolina fan, full disclosure, but like, get those 4 out of here. Just get them out of here. Let's get this back to a 3-weekend tournament. The 64 team bracket is cleaner. I know it's not going to happen because of money, of course, right? I don't want to see any expansion. That's me. I'm sure that some people are like, oh, look at the old guy with the gray beard. He's a real grouch. But why dilute the product? Like if you need to grow something in college sports, grow the college football playoff to 16 and have it be whatever that would be, 4 weekends. People lose their minds, but we don't need to do this in college basketball. This is a $1 billion a year enterprise. Everybody loves it. And the one argument I'll make from kind of a cultural standpoint that I do think is neat, and I welcome your pushback, but I don't think we have this anywhere else in sports, is right about now is the time in offices across America and at dinner tables across America, you have people picking up these brackets and going, St. Mary's. Where's St. Mary's? Creighton. Creighton's in what state again? And they're quizzing each other on nicknames and all that Thursday and Friday. No work gets done, and everybody cares whether it's real or momentary or whatever about basketball. They're into these games, and that's the beauty of it. Don't dilute it with 96 or 128 teams because I think it will lose that luster. It's kind of like conference realignment. Like, yeah, you can make a bigger cake and there can be more cake, but like I want that like 12-inch birthday cake. I don't need the sheet cake. How's that for a bad analogy? Yeah.
No, I agree with you completely because you're awarding mediocrity. I was watching the Mountain West Conference title game between Colorado State and Boise State. They
Yeah.
have a great player, but Boise State played terrible. Does it make me excited to see, Boise State, in the tournament? No. I mean, they're not worthy of it, and they were left out of the field, even though they had, I think it just dilutes it when you have teams under 500. Like, I just don't understand why, this is supposed to be the tournament of 64. I mean, it doesn't really make
Right.
sense for the overall.
I want to throw one other a wine editor, and you can axe this if you don't want it. But one thing that bothers me and has doing it with Dayton is don't send a team that's an automatic qualifier to Dayton. Don't send the winner of the MEAC there. Don't send the winner of the Patriot League there. Like, to me, if you want to expand the field, that's fine. Here's how I would expand the field. The last 10, 12, 16 teams, whatever, you send them all to Dayton, but they all have to be at-large considerations, right? So to me, you don't put the 16 seeds in Dayton because, one, it's kind of lame for them, right? Like Norfolk State. Like Norfolk State won their conference tournament. Don't make them go to Dayton. Give them the full experience of the tournament. And number two, I think this actually doesn't get mentioned enough, but if you send the 4 worst teams to Dayton, what happens? 2 of them lose, okay? So 2 of them never get to play a 1 seed. So what you're actually doing in a roundabout way is you're penalizing 1 seeds by sending the 4 16s to Dayton and eliminating them. So you have 2 1 seeds that for the last 13 years have been effectively playing a 15 seed. And what has happened in the last 15 years, we've seen 2 1 seeds go down. So I don't know, just a minor gripe.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I just hope that they don't tinker too much with the formula. I mean, it's one of the greatest sporting events in America. Why, if it's not broke,
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
exactly. Why are we trying to do that? Final question for you. What is kind of the takeaway you want readers to have when finishing just a book? What is kind of that one thing the impression you want in their minds once they're putting the book down when they're finished?
My hope is that this book, The Magnificent Seven, is for people who are casual basketball fans, but also for diehards, and that when you're done, you're going to have a couple of takeaways and you're going to go, I didn't know about that, right? And we don't have time for it now, but there's the Fabulous Five from Kentucky, this group from Kentucky in the late 1940s that went back to back, and they won an Olympic gold medal, and multiple of the Fab Five went to World War II. One of them was a prisoner of war for 16 months before the national titles. There's a great story in here about a guy named Art Heyman who committed to Carolina. Then after his stepdad got in a fight with the Carolina coach, rescinded, went to Duke, and was at the center of 2 major brawls between Duke and Carolina. He went to Duke after committing to Carolina. So I think there's stuff in here it's human, it's light, it's a great break, I think, from the larger stresses of the world right now. And it's if there's anybody who reads this book and goes, I knew everything in there. I read you will learn something from this book. That's my promise to you, even if you're a diehard college basketball fan.
Well, we appreciate the time, Jeff. Thank you very much. Can you let our audience know where they can find you if you're on social media? You have any other upcoming projects? Anything else you want our audience to know as well?
Absolutely, Justin. I appreciate it. I'm on the X. I guess you start there, right? At J_Tibbs, J_TIBS. I work for an NPR member station, a public radio station. I host a daily news and public affairs show. We dabble in basketball sometimes. It's called Due South, DUE South. It's on WUNC radio. And the book, The Magnificent Seven, we're going to have a launch party in Chapel Hill. So if anybody is listening in and around Chapel Hill, we're going to have an event, a party on Sunday, April 6th at 1 o'clock at Flyleaf Books. So come, say hello, buy a book or don't buy a book, but it'd be fun to see some faces at Flyleaf in Chapel Hill here in not too long.
Awesome, Jeff. Thank you for spending the time. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Justin, thank you. I enjoyed it.